So I wish to God someone had told me what the specular slider does, what the roughness slider does, what the anisotrophic slider does, and what all this stuff is. What is the normal? Oh gosh. So this is just to go through and give kind of a little brief update on what these things do and why you might want to use them. So starting out, I have here a cube with a metal shader on. I guess technically it's a metal texture, but we're going to be making the shader. So let's start out at the top. So metallic, right? This one's pretty obvious. It just, you slide it, and when it's at 1, you have a very metallic texture. And when you take it down to 0, it's very non-metallic. Moving on, we have specular, and specular basically is like how much the light rolls off of it. So you bring the specular to 0, you're going to get a really, really flat image, right? Like there's no light wraparound like there should be. And if you bring this all the way to 1, you're getting hyper light, hyper like wrapped material here. So I tend to leave specular at 0.5. It's kind of a nice in between. And then I use the metallic, the roughness, and the normal to give it some definition. So, what is roughness? Well, roughness, when it's at 0, means there's nothing rough on this texture at all. So it's completely glossy, completely reflective, right? And you can see that here, it's reflecting everything. And if you bring the roughness to 1, it's very flat. It's almost like bringing the specular to 0, right? Like you have a very, very flat, non-reflective at all. So zero point 0.5 is honestly pretty high reflectiveness, and we'll come back to that later. The anisotropic here, what this does is this changes like how the light plays of it. So you can see if anisotropic at 1, you have this material, kind of like what you'd see on a brushed metal like fridge or other kind of metal texture that has that like brushed look. And if you bring this to 0, it's just like a normal reflection. So this is a really good slider if you're trying to give something like a, I don't know, like an industrial metal type look. But normally I don't mess with this too much. I'm gonna honestly skip a bunch here because if you're using transmission or IQR or anything like that, just use a glass shader because that's basically what these are gonna do. Um, and I'm gonna go down to normal because that's the other big one I tend to use. So the normal basically is a great way to get a bump map. So if you plug in your material to the normal, you'll see it looks all weird, right? But if you press Shift A to bring up the search and search for bump, you can take this bump node and plug this in here and you see no difference. So we gotta plug this texture into the height of the bump. And now it's faking displacement. This is not true displacement. This is not actually changing the geometry. It's just making it look like it is, and the light is displaying that. So obviously this looks really gross. So and really pixelated. So if you turn the strength down, something very low, and you turn the distance down to something low as well, you can get a nice little bit of bump here, which plays with the light without it being too distracting. It's a really good way to help sell materials. Going back to the roughness, we want to make this look a bit nicer, right? Perhaps the rust here is going to be less reflective and everything else is going to be more. So how do we achieve that? Now, roughness is split up, and actually all of these are split up in values of black to white, right? So in roughness's case, black means it's off, so that's very reflective. And white means it's on, so that's not reflective at all. So to make this work, we need to make sure the rust is white, which means roughness is all the way up, and everything else is more towards black, which means no roughness whatsoever. Does that make sense? Basically, think of it as black means off, white means on. So I'm going to plug this color into the roughness, and you can see it's already doing something, but it's kind of doing the opposite of what we want because the rust is a bit darker than other parts, and we want to reverse that. So I'm going to add in a color ramp, like so. And if we select this and put this into the surface instead, you can see that, yes, everything is kind of a lighter gray, but that rust is darker. So I want to take these values and actually reverse them, and then I'm going to make this be kind of a mid-gray and drag this down so only really the white, or only the rust is white. Okay, so I'm going to add in another, you can add in as many of these as you want, but I'm only going to do 3 for this. And I'm going to kind of clamp this down by making this darker, so to even more make it so the rust is on its own. All right, so I select this again. You can see now we've got this material where the rust is standing out a bit more than everything else, which is pretty reflective. So I hope that makes sense to everyone what we're doing here. We've got the bump plugged into the normal, and then we've got this color ramp plugged into the roughness. And again, white means that it's not reflective. Dark means that it's going to be very, very reflective and have very little roughness. Now, if you really want to get into it, you can start adding in the metallic too. But yeah, we can do that right now. So I'm going to plug this as well into the material here. We're going to add in a color ramp. So again, similar rule of thumb here. White is going to mean it's very, very metallic. Black is going to mean it's not too metallic. So I want to clamp this in for the rust and kind of bring this up for everything else so that we have a very metallic material everywhere else, but the rust is a little bit less so. All right, is that making sense? Comment down below, please, if this isn't making sense. But this is basically how I set up my materials.